Welcome to Aquarian Diary, where we discuss issues around the emerging age of Aquarius. I'm your host, John Irving. Thank you for joining me. Greetings all, it is October 15th, 2022. I want to discuss something now that has been stuck in my head for about a week. And I actually wanted to record this several days ago, but just because of circumstances, I couldn't do that. So here I am now. And to me, this is extremely important, and I'm a bit worked up about it right now. Because as you know, if you've listened to me before, I read a fair amount. And one of the things that kind of drives me crazy, and has for a very long time, is that I see that people do not seem to be connecting the dots on something extremely important. I hear it, or I hear the lack of it, all the time. And people seem to be focusing their energy on things and missing the big picture, or missing critical points, pressure points. And I have, if you listen to the stuff I've produced over the last year or so, I have addressed this at various times and in various ways, not in a specific episode though, which is what I'm going to try and do here now. And to be honest with you, I'm feeling quite a bit of pressure to express this very clearly and directly, asking for guidance on that right now. What people do not seem to understand is that what is happening in the world right now, and not just in the United States, but all over the place. It's manifesting in Canada, it's manifesting in the UK, it's manifesting in Italy, it's manifesting in various other countries around the world. There's this trend of this shift towards authoritarian, illiberal, if not fascistic movements. And I myself here have tried to explore that to understand what's driving it, where it's coming from, and what's happening. And I still sometimes listen to other readers and people in there talking about the politicians, because the politicians are in our faces and they're like focal points that we can concentrate on. And they do crazy, stupid things that aggravate the hell out of us. And we all respond and go like, oh my God, I can't believe he said that, or they're doing this, or whatever. They are just the front people. They are the pawns. And this is the crux of what I'm about to argue, is that what's really going on is that behind the scenes, and I'm not just talking the think tanks, a lot of people talk about the think tanks, like the Federalist Society or whatever, they're pawns too. They are pawns too. The people really driving this are the people financing it. They're in the shadows. They're in the dark for the most part, but not completely. I have known this for many years because I was involved in promoting information around climate change a long time ago when most people didn't realize how serious of an issue it was. And I devoted thousands of hours to that, many thousands of hours. And I was alarmed by the fact that we actually had corporations, and in that case it was the fossil fuel industry, who were literally financing efforts to limit how people would perceive and respond to this existential threat. And I was alarmed by the underhanded and subversive, if not psychotic, lengths that they would go to do this. It is truly shocking. But what they had done is they had taken the playbook from the tobacco industry, which had pioneered a lot of these methodologies and techniques in much earlier times, like the 1960s and 70s. Same playbook. In order for someone to do those kinds of things, you're talking about somebody who basically has no conscience, no guilt, and all they're concerned about is their own power and wealth and greed or status. So extremely narcissistic, like pathologically narcissistic people, if not evil, because your actions could literally cause significant harm, if not the ultimate harm, to hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. Like, who could do something like that? It's absolutely and completely disturbing. For me personally, where I'm at, I just can't even conceive of being in a, I mean, I literally feel guilty if I step on a snail, right? I mean, I'm not exaggerating. What's going on right now is not about ideology, and it's not about religion. I was listening to a podcast a while ago, and they were interviewing an Iranian expat, someone who had emigrated to Canada. And she was saying that the ruling classes there live very liberal lives. They send their children to the best universities in North America and Europe, who all wear Western clothes and fashions and have very progressive attitudes. They simply play the fundamentalist religious card to keep the population in control. They don't really care about religion. It's all a ruse, just to manipulate and control the masses so that they don't rise up and the ruling classes would lose their great wealth and privilege. So don't kid yourself. It's not about the mullahs in Iran. They're not really in control. They aren't running the security forces, etc. That's what everyone is led to believe. As usual, it's really about the money. The flock, the sheep, the masses are being manipulated through their emotions and their beliefs to support political organizations, groups, and initiatives that are, in fact, diametrically opposed to their very own interests, as well as reality itself, literally. Now, many people do not realize this, but it's actually kind of a little bit hard to be sympathetic towards somebody who can be so detached from and impervious to objectifiable reality and facts. Because most of us sit there in awe and go like, how can you believe this crap? Right? It's just utter nonsense. It's transparently idiotic. It's a con, or it's transparently conspiracy theories or whatever. And so the powers, the real powers that be, are using the think tanks and the lobbyists and the politicians to get things done that the public would not tolerate otherwise. And I think what happened, and I did a whole episode on the Powell memo a year ago, I think what happened was that these plutocrats realized that their agenda, what they wanted to do, would be so unpalatable to the general public that they said, we have to figure out another way to make this happen. And then they took the path of manipulating the populace in order to achieve their desired outcomes. So, for example, just using the climate change issue again, they know they can't beat the science. They know they can't beat the facts. So what they do then instead is say, well, we'll convince everybody that it's a conspiracy theory, or we'll cast doubt on the validity of this or whatever. And we won't be able to do that with everybody, but there's enough people out there that we can manipulate that we will end up at the same place that we wanted to get to. And then the other thing that we can do at the same time is we can subvert the political system, the system of governance, so that we can achieve policy outcomes that'll favor our industry and our profitability and so forth. The fossil fuel industry literally has trillions of dollars worth of untapped assets, which is much more than the gross domestic product of many countries, even some developed ones. So their pockets are almost limitlessly deep. And so if you're somebody who's kind of sociopathic or psychopathic and you don't actually care what happens to billions of people and countless species and whatever, you're just you'll do whatever the hell you have to do to get what you want, even if it means that you identify that democracy itself is an obstacle and we have to undermine and get rid of democracy to achieve our ends so that we can concentrate power in our own hands, and then we basically get rid of governance. Now, I'm using the fossil fuel industry here as an example, but this goes beyond just the fossil fuel industry. This could be any financial power or player who wants to eliminate regulations of any kind. Could be taxation, could be restrictions on the way they conduct business, red tape, or even the law, or whatever. So the reason I find this so annoying is that this has been very clear to me for a very long time. In fact, I was out today. I had to go to an appointment. I had to wait, and I was chatting with somebody. And when I came home, I'm kind of like, these people are completely oblivious to what is happening. And that is a scary thing. I remember back in, I believe it was like 1996, 96, 95. I was on a ferry going from Vancouver to Victoria in British Columbia. And I was just chatting with this guy, probably 10 years older than me, very progressive, very liberal, very well informed, smart, very good conversationalist. We had an amazing conversation. And of course, I brought up the topic of climate change. And his response to me was, oh, well, we'll figure out how to fix that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, oh, they'll come up with some technological solution to it. There's nothing to worry about. And I'm just like, what? I pushed back a bit, but then afterwards I was kind of in a state of shock because I'm like, here's somebody who's liberal, progressive, very well informed about politics, obviously does a fair amount of reading, and he is completely out of touch with what is perhaps the biggest issue that humanity will ever face collectively. And it scared the crap out of me because his view was that, oh, well, we'll solve that down the road. There'll be some silver bullet that'll get us out of the boiling water kind of thing. And I'm like, no, that's not going to happen. It can't. It just won't. The Earth's climate is too vast and the Earth's climate system is too complex. We don't have any kind of technology remotely that can alter the global climate in any kind of fast, meaningful, and safe way. And with that attitude, this kind of delusional, magical thinking, not grounded in reality, we're going to end up just going further and further down the road until we get to the point where we're on the edge of the cliff, if not over it. And that conversation stuck in my head for years. It terrified me because it made me realize that that's how people think, right? That, oh, kick the can down the road. Why am I bringing that up here? Because people are not focusing on what is really going on and what is really driving this. The religious groups, the ideological nuts, the crazy people, they are just useful idiots and rubes for these plutocrats who basically are at present in the middle of unraveling democracy because democracy is getting in the way of their profits. The fossil fuel industry alone has trillions of dollars worth of assets at stake. There are all kinds of other industries too who do not want regulations, obstacles, or restrictions of any kind. They want to get rid of taxation. And I think what has happened is that they have figured out that most of humanity is so gullible that they can be easily manipulated into doing things like literally overthrowing governments, like what almost happened or was attempted to happen on January 6th in the United States. There's some kind of twisted karmic irony involved here because the U.S. has subversively overthrown countless governments around the world, and that is a fact. And these dark groups can easily funnel money. They can provide expertise. They can hire the best propagandists, the best writers, the best thinkers in many, not all, but in many cases, the best think tanks, lawyers, you name it, anything. They have installed Supreme Court justices and judges throughout the legal system, like Judge Cannon. They have tools at their disposal that we and the government don't even have. Because the government has to do like millions of things at once. And they have to deal with democracy, which is messy. These organizations don't have to do that. They can have very concentrated, focused, accomplished, and intelligent people who are willing to do this kind of dirty work for them and who will get very well compensated. The government can't pay people millions of dollars a year as consultants. That, it's just democracy can't really compete in some ways with these kinds of organizations. Let's say they were to make the United States a theocracy. They don't give a crap about religion. But under that kind of a regime, they can then put in place all kinds of policies and regulations that favor them because these people are so easily manipulated. They could then, under that guise, use all kinds of means of enforcement to get rid of anybody who opposes them in any way. It's not about, for them, religion or ideology. Their only ideology is power and money. Think about the infamous Southern preachers who vacuum up vast sums of money from their followers so they can fly around in private jets and get plastic surgery and all this stuff. It's that same kind of thing, except on a much larger scale. And in the US, for example, they have their minions strewn throughout the government and the electoral systems to undermine democracy. And they've been doing this for years. And this topic is very timely because we're at the final stages of Pluto transiting Capricorn. And over the next couple years, Pluto, as I've discussed before, is going to be hitting 29 degrees of Capricorn, where all of this stuff is going to come to a head. And if we're lucky, this stuff will come to light. Now, one of the reasons I'm concerned about this is because politics, for example, in the United States, requires so much money now that politicians are dependent on vast sums of money from all kinds of sources just to exist. And so, are the Democrats, for example, going to go to war with certain corporations? The corporations who, for example, are funding all the MAGA stuff and these think tanks that are basically trying to undermine democracy. Do they have the guts to do that? Can they afford to do that? How many of them have received financial support from lobbyists and organizations that work with these corporations? You know, it would be very politically challenging for example, the Democrats to come out and say, we have a huge problem with corporate America. This is a huge component of the American psyche and identity. We're talking about the American dream. How do you go after that? How do you even admit that it's corrupt? Or maybe even a fraud? This is like mythological. This explains why the country is so vulnerable, because it cannot even look at the problem directly, or maybe even admit that it exists. Under the Republicans mostly, these corporations and very powerful individuals have received so many tax breaks and loopholes that now their coffers, so to speak, have expanded dramatically. They have more money than they know what to do with. If you look at charts, you'll see how much a greater share of the income has gone to these kinds of individuals over the past 50 years than it has to the middle class. Now we know that rising rates of income inequality and income disparity and increasing concentration of wealth in the hands of a few has been occurring since roughly the early 1970s. Coincidentally, this, of course, has exacerbated the social tensions and social division that we are experiencing now. And I can't help but wonder whether or not that situation serves two purposes. One, to put more wealth in the hands of the plutocrats, and two, to create social division and stress or tension to destabilize society, pitting everyone against each other so they can implement policies that, like I said, would otherwise be unacceptable under normal or routine conditions. The relationship between all the political parties and these kinds of organizations is so intertwined. It's almost like they have a symbiotic relationship. Now, I'm not suggesting that the Democrats are deliberately doing any of this stuff, but I know for a fact that many corporations finance both parties. They play both sides deliberately in order to maintain influence, regardless of whoever comes into power. So it's all about lobbying and influence. That is kind of scary because really what's going on is that we're at war. And if we lose, we're going to end up living under some kind of a system like what China has, or what Russia has, or what many of the other corrupt kleptocracies and autocracies have around the world. I mean, the Republicans have literally been promoting Viktor Orban of Hungary as someone to emulate, and many openly admire Putin. So, like I said, one of the things that really upsets me is that people don't talk about this. At this level, it's like people are under some spell or illusion or delusion about what's actually happening. It's not about culture wars. That's all bullshit. That's just all a distraction and a means of dividing the population. They're deliberately amplifying all. Why does FOX News do what it does? Well, they make money, but they're also connected to all of these organizations and groups who have shitloads of money. And it's very clear that they are deliberately antagonizing and amplifying people's fear and emotions and hatred and spreading disinformation. And how do we allow all this to happen? It's like our societies are being attacked from all sides in this psychological, psychic, and spiritual warfare. And that's what's going on if you look at this objectively and rationally. And nobody is doing anything about it. And even in the reader community, I hardly ever hear anybody talk about this stuff. All they do is they talk about the politicians, this politician, that politician. This is why Spirit is intervening. I've done episodes on this. I've talked about a lot of this stuff before. Spirit is intervening because we are at this critical juncture where we could go to the dark side. Strong energy right here, right now. I'm right. Wow. People have to wake up, basically. Like, it drives me nuts that nobody gets this, and I don't understand why. And you don't see this really, there's some people, there are a few people, but not many in the media who are even focusing on this kind of stuff. And here's another thing. We have to fight back. They are fighting really hard and really dirty, and we are not. Like, we have to fight back just like what Zelensky is doing in Ukraine. We have to do the same friggin' thing. And then when the dust settles and when we have resumed control of the world and secured it, then we can get into the autopsy and try and fix things and soothe people's hurt feelings and stuff like that. But it's like what's happening in Ukraine. It's a metaphor. If the Ukrainians didn't fight, Putin would be in there and that'd be it. Like, they would be part of Russia indefinitely because Russians would put some nuclear weapons there and bam, it's done. Like, nobody could touch them. But people need to wake up. It's like there's a mass illusion going on, is what I sense. And I don't know what it will take for people to just wake up and see what's happening. I'm not making this up. If you just read enough and you look into this, the history of what's been happening for the past 50 years or so, starting in the 1970s mostly. After the countercultural movement, which pissed off the establishment, when young people basically said, this is stupid, we're not doing this bullshit, it makes no sense, that is when they started to respond. It was very shortly thereafter. I don't have time to do reading for people, but I can assure you that there is a vast amount of evidence that when you piece it all together, it all comes to the same conclusion. And these people have to be rooted out and held accountable for subversion, if not treason, basically. It has to be done. I don't know that someone like Biden has the backbone to do it. I think he's too conciliatory. We need somebody who really won't hold back and will do what needs to be done because it is urgent. Like, for example, while we're dealing with all this crap, we're facing an environmental catastrophe that's looming, and it's not getting better, despite what a lot of people think. It is not actually getting better yet. We have a lot of work to do, and we're not going to be able to do it while there's hundreds of millions of people who are completely detached from reality because of deliberately and intentionally fabricated and deployed propaganda and conspiracy theories. Make no mistake about it, Disinformation is a weapon, and it is being used to undermine the fabric of our societies and governance. And this is international too, and don't think that it isn't. Look at Liz Truss, what just happened in the UK. Those completely insane and absurd libertarian policies that they tried to ram down people's throats and almost bankrupted the country in a matter of a few days. That was a trial run. That was a trial balloon. Like I've said before, they'll just tweak it and modify it and do the same thing somewhere else, and they'll try again until they're successful. These people are completely brainwashed and delusional, products of billionaire-funded think tanks, Kool-Aid drinkers, people like Truss and Kwarteng. They should be nowhere near the levers of power, at least until they can be deprogrammed, if that's possible. A few days ago, I posted on my community tab on YouTube that I don't understand why we don't just organize and boycott the companies that are funding and supporting the MAGAs, for example, or financing right-wing think tanks or super PACs. Even a 10 or 15% decline in revenues would be a real shot across the bow. The Republicans, of course, would scream bloody murder, but these are the very same people who want to dismantle liberal democracy and shove a theocracy down your throat, so who cares what they think? Now, the Democrats are not likely to endorse this because they would probably be concerned that it would interrupt the flow of donations to their party, which is essential for their survival. And it would raise all kinds of issues about, as I discussed already, the American identity. But that doesn't mean that progressively oriented groups couldn't do this independently. It seems like a very simple solution to me. For example, one of, if not the largest, home building supply companies, a name that everyone knows, the founder is a Trump supporter. So every time you go there, you're basically financing the erosion of your democracy. Think about it. Anyway, this is way longer than I wanted it to be, but I think this is very important, and I really need to get this off my chest because it's been driving me nuts. Like I said, I've had this awareness for years, and I've been kind of in a state of shock the whole time about what's actually happening here, because I could see it coming. And I was mostly alarmed because hardly anyone was talking about it. It's like humanity was in a daze and might not wake up in time. Do not underestimate these people and what they're capable of. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that we should not underestimate them at all. They are capable of doing things that most people would find shocking and horrifying. If that's not already self-evident, it should be. If it isn't, you're not paying attention. Presumably you are. While I was recording this, I had to stop at one point because I felt I was being checked in on, and I had to call in protection. Oh, I'm getting energy right now to affirm that, basically. So one other thing that really pisses me off is that when some of the readers and people out there are saying things like, oh, it's all love and light, kumbaya, blah, blah, blah. Total bullshit. The kind of people we're talking about here are, like I said, capable of doing anything. All we have to do is look at, for example, what Putin did to Ukraine, or what, I'm not going to give too many examples because I don't want to trigger alarms with this platform, but just read the news. These people are completely ruthless and depraved and dangerous, and only an idiot would suggest otherwise. And I don't want to stress people out about it either, but we can't deny reality. That is part of this fog of illusion that people are under. All you have to do is read the mainstream media and put two and two together, and you can see how threatening this situation is. And so don't think for a minute that there aren't things happening on other levels too. And I have had direct personal experience on that level with dark beings, very powerful ones, on many occasions. And I have never succumbed to that. I've always fended it off. It's one of the reasons I have spent so much time learning about how to protect myself energetically. It's a necessity, especially if you're going to be putting yourself out there like this. This isn't just happening on an egoic level. This is like a war for the planet. So yeah, people who downplay that, I think, are doing a real profound disservice to humanity, because what we are facing is extremely risky and fraught with peril. What they want to do, basically, is to enslave us, literally. I actually believe that we are going to come through this somehow, but what I'm saying is that we have to take off the blinders and we can't be naive. Anyway, I'll stop now, and I'll leave it at that. I'll put any relevant links in the description. I will put some links for how you can connect with me in other ways. Please do that. I really appreciate it if you like and share my videos. It really helps with the algorithms to get me a bit more visibility. And again, as usual, I really appreciate your comments. We really, 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 really need to wake up. Thank you, and we'll talk to you again soon.